United States eventually got into that. Well, Bomber Harris, who was chief of Bomber Command, the British Bomber Command in '42, when he was put in that position.
Oh, we're going to talk about all the candidates, because politicians nowadays, you know what they do?
Well, yeah.
They roll up their sleeves.
And yeah, he believed in that, bombing German cities.
So in order to talk about folks, right on down to Mitt Romney, I noticed is he's got the shirts, he's rolled up and ready to go.
He's ready to go to work, and he's a corporate candidate, for crying out loud.
Oh, welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight we're going to have a visit again from our resident historian, Mark Albertson. Mark's been with us a number of times. We talked about a lot of episodes in American history, particularly in relation to world history. But tonight we're going to talk about something a little different. We're going to review the Republican primary so far, talk a little bit about each candidate, talk a little bit about President Obama, talk about his accomplishments or things he hasn't accomplished, and go from there. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So, which candidate do you want to start with? Which is the most intriguing to you?
Oh, I mean, we could throw a dart at the board here.
Well, then let's start. Well, we don't have pizza, so we can. Well, we don't have pizza, so we can't start with Herman Cain.
Herman Cain is with the dearly departed.
Michelle Bachmann. Now, you really must have been intrigued by Michelle Bachmann's, let's say, lack of historical knowledge, lack of factual knowledge in a lot of respects, and with the reference to John Wayne's hometown in Iowa, and in fact it was John Wayne Gacy's hometown, right. The Lexington and Concord thing with Concord, New Hampshire. Reflect a little bit on her campaign.
She's part of that movement, and which is understandable to get women more involved in politics,
which is a good thing, of course.
Which is a good thing, right? I mean, should they be involved? Yes, they should, because when you disinvolve women, it's like you're cutting your brain power in half. I mean, they have brains, so let them help try to figure out policy too.
Absolutely.
I mean, Golda Meir might be an example here. Margaret Thatcher might be an example here of women who have taken their talents and gone to the top.
Some great examples in recent American history. I saw Christy Todd Whitman on television the other night. Of course, Olympia Snowe, big shout out to Olympia Snowe. Really fine, reasonable woman in the Senate from Maine for a number of years, who's leaving because she doesn't see that ability to find common ground anymore in the United States Senate. Hillary Clinton, although personally, I had some problems with Hillary Clinton during the '08 election based on her refusal to disengage her support for the invasion of Iraq. That's a strategic move on her part. It cost her, but again, you see she's doing a great job. How is she doing as Secretary of State, in your opinion?
Well, she's a corporate candidate. I mean, she helped in that in that coup in Honduras.
Yeah,
put a pro-American government back in Honduras. But recently, she has worked on consummating a deal very recently with North Korea, where North Korea will stop enriching uranium and cut back on missile tests in exchange for 240,000 metric tons of nutritional assistance, as they call it.
So food for the people, which is
correct for the people.
That seems like a great way to make friends.
Well, yeah, it is. Some people will say. In fact, I've traded some emails with some people on this about this, and I said, well, if you go back to the Clinton years, and there was talk between us and the North Koreans. They're waving the nuclear the nuclear saber here, and we bought them off with 500,000 tons of oil. And then they did the same thing when Bush was in office, Bush Jr., and he bought them off with 1 million tons. And I'm thinking, well, so much for this tough guy. He's going to give them 1 million tons of oil.
Yeah.
But Iran, that we pick on sometimes here, doesn't have a nuclear weapon. We're putting a lot of pressure on them.
Yeah.
So I guess having a nuclear weapon works in foreign policy.
It seems like if I were them, I mean, it's sometimes hard to step outside yourself and look at things from the other guy's perspective. But I guess if I were any foreign country, I would probably say, well, you know, the best way to not use nuclear weapons is for everybody to have nuclear weapons.
Well, the genie is out of the box, so I mean, try putting it back in the box. It's not, I won't say maybe impossible, but it's a stretch. But you know, we're the ones that put the Iranians on the road to atomic energy anyway. In 1958-59, with the Atoms for Peace program by the Eisenhower administration, and Iran was one of the first countries to sign the NPT treaty, 1968 or so, 1969. Nuclear non-proliferation. Correct. Okay. And they've done that. The problem is they've cut short the inspections. Of course,
which lends to suspicion.
Correct, and suspicion justified. I would hazard a guess to say. But the problem here is, well, if I was sitting in Tehran, I would be saying, okay, we'll allow inspections as long as Israel does.
That would probably be, and we don't know for a fact that they haven't put that on the table, because I'm not sure if that would, if that notion would find its way into American media through the news reports.
I would hazard a guess and say it wouldn't, and if not, if you'd have to look to find it, because Israel wants to maintain their primacy in the Middle East. I mean, they are the regional power, and they want to maintain that. You know, any power wants to maintain its primacy, you know, without any competition. I mean, the Royal Navy did that for centuries, so that hasn't changed.
You mentioned that corporate angle. Getting back to the Republican candidates,
right?
How corporate are they? I mean, there's obviously the Romney faction, which appears to be hyper corporate. I mean, he's made a big issue out of corporations are people, about bailing out the automakers was a bad thing, when in fact that seemed to have worked very well so far. So we'll establish Romney as a corporate candidate. Some of the other guys, particularly Santorum, talks more like the religious candidate. Is there a corporate angle to him?
He's not getting as much money as a Romney is. I mean, I'm sure. Pardon me. I'm sure these corporate types, the bankers and so on, are realists. Yeah. You know, are they going to go in with Santorum's you know, some of these ideas that are based on his Catholic religion of, I mean, at one point when he was senator, he wanted creationism in school. You know, that's not a separation of church and state. I mean, you think that's fair to Muslims, or maybe even some Jewish people who wouldn't want to see that? Of course,
probably not fair to Quakers, to the United
Correct.
Unitarian Church,
correct,
the Methodist Church, and any of the other churches that seem to like that separation and seem to have different notions about who Jesus was,
correct,
and what Jesus' role on earth was compared to the, we'll call them Bible thumping Baptists, probably also to a degree Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, or kind of a right-wing branch of Christianity or non-Christianity. There's obviously there are words from Rick Santorum's side that they're comparing Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church to Islam.
Well, here you have a man like Santorum who's made no bones about saying that sex is for procreation only, things of this nature. Yet he provides a problem for some evangelicals. Now, if you look at Newt Gingrich, who's been divorced twice, now on a third wife, and twice went behind the
she's
the
looking
previous
over her
wife.
shoulder, probably.
Maybe. Went behind the wife's back and was playing around, and then he became a Catholic. I'm sure that doesn't play well with some evangelicals who, you know, the strict religious types who view this as, well, this isn't a person of moral character that I want in the White House.
Even though, of course, you know, forgiveness is a big part of Christianity. But
correct.
The question is, how many times can a person be forgiven before you say to yourself, well, you know, maybe is he sincere or is he not sincere about his
and the flip side to this is Gingrich is more of the intellectual than Santorum is.
Absolutely. He speaks much more clearly about issues.
He does, and he has a pretty good handle on American history. Probably better than all those candidates put together. especially like a Michelle Bachmann, who you alluded to earlier, made that mistake up in Concord, New Hampshire, alluding, these people should be proud of having fired the first shots in the American Revolution. That's something Gingrich never would have done. So truth be told, Gingrich is probably more the intellectual here, as opposed to maybe a Ron Paul, who is perhaps more of, in the eyes of maybe certain people, more of a realist with regards to foreign policy, saying these wars are illegal that we're in. Congress, President has to go before Congress and ask for a declaration of war. We're going broke fighting these wars. I mean, the last time I checked, he was still getting more money from people in uniform than the other presidential candidates, and that happened in 2008 as well. So history is repeating itself here. Is that going to give him the nomination? Probably not. He has other baggage as far as domestic policy goes. He's more of an isolationist than probably perhaps a lot of these candidates. But the fact of the matter is, the big corporate candidate of all these Republicans is probably Romney. I mean, look at his tax policy. I mean, he's put out this tax policy which 57% of his tax breaks go to the richest 1%. And as David K. Smith said the other day, or David K. Johnson, the writer the other day said, his tax policy is the Bush policy on steroids.
So it goes way beyond the Bush tax cuts of 2001.
Well, the Bush tax cuts for the rich were supposed to be for 10 years. Obama extended them for 2. Romney would like to make them permanent. And on top of that, he would his tax, according to tax policy, the tax policy findings, his tax policy would raise the taxes $157 a year on the poorest 125 million Americans. So, is that a corporate agenda? Yeah, I would hazard to guess say it is. And then he would get rid of the tax credit for working class families looking to send 1 or 2 children to school. And there's nothing to replace that.
And how do you build a stronger America if you don't have the opportunity for people to get their kids a good education?
Correct. Well, you don't. I mean, to add to that, it's a side note against not the candidates. There's actually a thing going on in Norwalk today, in one of the schools, where they're having a rally. Do your best for the test. Now, to me, if you have a rally, it's for school spirit and stuff. Do your best for the test. This is a rally,
and this is the tests that have evolved around out of No Child Left Behind.
Correct. So you're having a rally for that. This shows the general trend on education in this country. And having people like Romney with their tax structure, it works against education in this country. So, but that seems to be the general trend anyway. I mean, the rich aren't investing in this country. They're sending their money overseas. I mean, the working poor, the middle class bail out the banks, and yet the banks don't reciprocate by investing in our economy. They borrow money from the Fed at 0.25% interest, and then they go to some place like Australia, which is paying 5.25%, 5.5%, and then pocket the arbitrage difference, and they don't invest the money back in this country. And this is what somebody like a Romney represents.
And I'll have to throw in that being a part of an active member of Occupy Wall Street, and in this case, of course, Occupy Danbury, that one of the main focuses has been on getting money out of the large banks and into local banks, because local banks reinvest their profits locally. They're members of the community much more than large corporate banks, and it was noted early on that in 2010, when we began talking about this in 2010, Bank of America made exactly 1 commercial loan in the state of Connecticut in 2010. One commercial loan. And that was it. I guess that's what you call window dressing.
Well, yeah, I guess you could say that. But, and Obama has contributed to this as well. I mean, in the 2008 election, him and Biden got more money from Wall Street than McCain and Palin. Of course, I can see why.
Well, they were betting on a winner, probably, for one thing. And they as you mentioned earlier, you alluded to the fact that corporate contributions are pretty much spread across the board.
Right.
With anybody that seems like they might be malleable to the needs of large corporations, they certainly don't give to a guy like Rick Santorum, who's out in left field talking about stuff that has nothing to do with They don't know how to look at him exactly, I'm sure.
Well, I think Santorum is somewhat of a blind, because the more he talks about religion, the less we're focusing on income inequality in this country, the less we're focusing on the tax structure, the less we're focusing on Iraq and Afghanistan. So does that work for certain powers that be? Sure it does. Sure it does. It diverts the conversation.
And if he were in line with the teachings of Jesus Christ, he probably would be focusing on all those things.
Well, you would think so. I mean, of course, some people I know don't like to hear this, but was Jesus a revolutionary? Yeah, I guess you could classify. That's what Karl Marx called him.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, Marx is the one that said religion is the opiate of the masses, anyway. And it's interesting because as Santorum talks, you know, about this strict conservative Catholic ideology that he espouses, you know, only 1/3 of Catholics are going to church anyway. And most Catholics engage in contraception.
Yeah,
and most Catholics favor abortion or favor an individual's right to choose.
There's that great, schizophrenia is not the word I'm looking for, but there's that great difference, that great difference of Catholics, how they believe in their church, they believe in a lot that their church teaches, but there's a lot of stuff that they just go against, which includes, of course, contraception and these other things. They stand against their own church on a lot of major issues.
Well, Santorum is the one that's mentioned too, that, you know, that our government's based on I forget the exact wording, but on religion, which, if you listen to Thomas Jefferson, who once used the term priest-ridden, no priest-ridden society is that's any good.
Well, they looked at they were looking backwards at Europe, where the Catholic Church dominated Europe.
Well, you had the papal states at one point. In fact, if you look back in your history, you will find, the Catholic Church has been one of those really a sordid organization for quite a few centuries. I mean, the torture, persecution, extortion, backing slavery, conquest. I mean, a lot of these religions have spread by war. The Crusades, right? The Crusades were largely a matter of loot anyway. But I mean, you can actually get into, the Islamic religion spread by war. I mean, a lot of the Bedouins joined Muhammad. Why? Because there was a chance to get booty and loot. If it wasn't for that, they wouldn't have joined.
So you had this back and forth over the centuries of the Catholic Church making its inroads toward the Holy Land, or the wealthy land, if you will.
Well, I mean, take the Philippines.
And then backwards in the opposite direction.
Right. Well, take the Philippines. I mean, how do you think the Catholic religion got to the Philippines? Do you think it got there by young clerics trying to pay their way through the seminary by selling Bibles door to door? It didn't work that way. It worked because the Spanish army took the Philippines. That's how it got. That's how it works. But if you go back through your history, you will see. If you go back to 1555, Pope Paul IV would Comnimus Absurdus, a papal bull promulgating ghettos for Jews. So if you look at the Nazi years, I mean, they had ghettos for Jews, let's say at least 10 years, let's say 10 years, if that.
Yeah.
You know, the Third Reich only lasted 12 years.
Yeah.
Jews had to wear distinctive badging or distinctive clothing. That's what was in the Catholic promulgation for Jews. Jews were restricted in their comings and goings out of the ghetto. Same thing in the Papal States. In the Papal States, Jews were supposed to go to Catholic education to be re-educated. The Christians were told that they weren't supposed to use Jewish doctors, and so on and so forth. And Napoleon is when it closed them down.
How does it compare to the Spanish Inquisitions?
Well, the Spanish Inquisition was an attempt to turn Jews into Christians, because they were marginalizing Jews, like in Spain. But it brought Jews closer together. People say, people even today say, well, they're very intellectual. Okay, that's fine. But when you're locked up in a ghetto, what do you have to do? So you concentrate on togetherness. You concentrate on your faith. You do and that's what they did. You got to give those people credit for doing that, for pulling together.
Makes you stronger. Whatever, it doesn't kill you, or it hasn't killed you yet.
Right, but I mean after the French Revolutionary Army was kicked out of Italy, the Pope was able to resurrect the ghettos, and the last Jewish ghetto from the Catholic Church was closed down in 1870 in Rome. And from what I understand, there's a cafe there now. But this is what happens when you allow a theocratic rule. So when Santorum, to me, is the type that is like a 16th or 17th century person in a 21st century presidential campaign, which brings to light...
So he's building bridges back to the 16th century, if he can.
Well, it seems like that. So it seems like, you know, for what we condemn Osama bin Laden for, we're doing here.
And what we condemned many people that opposed John Kennedy's presidency or his aspiration as president.
Because as a too moderate a Catholic. Kennedy made the announcement, separation of church and state would be my administration.
But early on, prior to the election, there was a lot of concern on the part of non-Catholics that this Catholic guy would be beholden to the Catholic Church, and the United States would be ruled from the Vatican.
All right, the 1928 presidential campaign. Al Smith from New York. The Irish Catholic Al Smith.
Yeah.
And the Republicans were saying, well, if Smith gets in, the Pope's going to be installed in the White House. If Smith gets in, we'll have the Inquisition in the United States. Well, it's all malarkey. Go back a few years ago, you heard from some conservative pundits, well, there's Sharia law in this country.
You're hearing that.
Where?
Basil likes to go on... Basil Budakat, as you all know. Basil likes to go on conservative blogs. He likes to go on Newsmax, and he likes to go on Conservative Byte. And he's telling me about how this is what he's seeing there, that there's this fear that's cropped up about Obama's taking us, and the forces of darkness are taking us towards Sharia law in our courts, and you know, we look and we look and we look, and we're not seeing any of that. It's
really interesting. But in the end, it's this corporatism that we've built.
Let's give our due to Ron Paul here for a minute now, because we've talked off camera a little bit about the libertarians, which is what Ron Paul is essentially, and liberals have a lot of common ground in terms of not the United States not being adventuresome in the world and not doing this nation building thing, which cropped up during the Bush administration. It's cropped up a lot of other times in history where we've gone into countries where the CIA is. Salvador Allende was murdered. A lot of people have been murdered, and a lot of governments have been overthrown and replaced. And of course, Allende was killed and replaced by Auguste Pinochet, who proceeded to slaughter off many Chileans. So Ron Paul, what's his role in all of this? I mean, he's been there. Every state he gets is between 10 and 15%.
Right.
He's there. He's got a strong following. How do progressives, liberals, if you will, how do liberals and libertarians, how do they find common ground? Where do they find common ground? Is there common ground that they can achieve to accomplish some things?
Sure. There's a lot of progressives, or as you say, liberals, who do not like what's going on with corporate America. Yet, conversely, supposedly, if you look at how this Tea Party is structured, of course, they've gotten a lot of money from wealthy backers, but there are I will call them legitimate conservatives or legitimate libertarians who don't like the fact that corporate America is the way it's being run. They don't like that. So you can find common ground with progressives here and libertarians because they do share that dislike. That's called building. Of course, in leftist parlance years ago, that would have been called a popular front. So that smacks of a socialist or communist approach.
What's with this socialist business anyway? I mean, you know, this is something. It's just if somebody is a socialist, is somebody that's opposed to them an anti-socialist?
Well, again,
the power of words.
Yeah, the power of words. I mean, you had Glenn Beck at one point throwing out these terms like every week. This week, Obama's a socialist. This week, he's a Marxist. This week, he's a communist. And they throw these terms out, and people are confused. I'm sure most Americans don't know what a socialist is. You know, there is a difference between socialism and communism. You know, real socialism is the common ownership of the means of production, land and capital, and also the means of getting that fruits of production to the market. Socialists also believe in public education. Well, we had that here when we were in a socialist society, up till now anyway. Of course, they're ruining that. But the fact of the matter is, socialists believe in a peaceful assimilation of power, as opposed to the Marxist approach of a violent overthrow. You know, the proletarians against the bourgeoisie, and then you will have a dictatorship of the proletariat until the bourgeois class has been eliminated. However, there's a violent approach to that. Also, socialists believe in private property. Marxists, communists do not. They don't believe in private property. So there are differences here. But you know, but whenever you get into this discussion, like with conservatives, they'll say, well, you know,
they bandy words about.
Correct.
Now, on that note, we're going to ask that people not look at this red tablecloth with too much suspicion. We're going to come back. We're going to come back and do a second show that'll be aired on Thursday. Noon 30, as Kristen would say, 12:30. We're going to come back and do a second show, talk about socialism, communism, and Marxism, and a lot of other stuff. Thank you very much for joining us at Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. Special guest, Mark Albertson, who this week is not pretending to be the baseball player or the or the sportscaster.
Marv Albert.
Thank you. Well, shoots and he scores. Okay. Good night. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Okay. Nope.